Hello, everybody. Welcome to the very first episode of Reason and Belief. I'm Nathan Sigmund here with co-host Travis Wells.
Hey,
Um, Thank you for tuning in to listen. I'm really looking forward to the conversation today. Since this is the first episode, I do want to take a little bit of time to let you guys get a chance to know who we are, give you a little bit of an idea of where we're coming from with our own beliefs, give you an idea of what our perspective is, as well as give you, and hopefully this episode will give everybody a good idea of what to kind of expect from the show, and things like that. So to start it off, as I said, my name is Nathan. I've been a Christian for most of my life. And I've spent a lot of time during my life as a Christian, looking at the questions of, that face Christians about, what is the truth? Is my belief, is it founded in anything? Is it, something that should be believed in? Do I believe what I believe just because it's what I've been taught, or is there something deeper to it? So that's a little bit about me. What about you, Travis?
sorry, I had it muted again.
You're-
All right. All right. So, let's see. From the earliest part of my life, I actually went to a Christian school, Vandalia Christian School in North Carolina, and I grew up believing in God till about 2012. I went on a mission trip, and that pretty much lost my faith for me right there, because at a certain point, like, I started to, start testing the Bible, as you just said, and see if it, and just try to apply it. And it just, it unraveled before me, and it was a pretty painful experience. I guess the most honest word to describe myself as an atheist, but for reasons that, like Dr. Sam Harris has put down, I don't particularly care for the word, because one, it tends to build a wall, and I prefer bridges. And I don't particularly like being described by what I am not. So, I mean, I don't ski either, so I might as well not be a non-skier, So, no, at the current time, I do not believe that there is gods or spirits or anything like that. However, I'm open to changing my mind should, anything arise. Prior to losing my faith, I was actually on the track to become a minister myself with the IPHC, and it was pretty positive experience. I mean, I still have a great deal of respect for the elders that was over me. It's just a personal transformation that went on in my life, and I mean, we parted ways on the theological level, but definitely not on the respect level. I mean, they're some of the greatest people I've ever met, So, yeah, I mean, I think open conversation like this is always going to be the absolute best thing that can happen.
And I totally agree with that. And one of the reasons why I personally have wanted to do a project in this vein for a while is, in my opinion, a lot of, I've listened to several debates and things of that nature, and, that open discussion that you're talking about is something that I love. It's something that, I truly love to be engaged in. And, whenever I listen to a lot of these debates, regardless of whether or not I completely agree with, the people coming from either side, it's always felt to me, like, at least in the ones that I've listened to, that the guys on the Christian side they tend to fall back on certain weaknesses in their argument and don't do a very good job of defending the Christian viewpoint. They tend to cite certain things as evidence that you really can't call evidence, and it ends up making it look like they're not really being a part of a intelligent discussion because they're refusing to look at whether it be evidence or whatever that's been presented over time and refuse to approach it directly. You know what I mean?
Yes, definitely. A lot of what when it comes to apologists, what I've ran into is a lot of them, and I don't think they realize it, but a lot of their arguments rely on like circular logic. And circular logic is a statement which tries to prove itself by itself without any outside causation.
Right.
It's hard to think of an example, honestly, because I try not to think in that manner anymore, but like rhetorical evidence, trying to use words to make something sound fine, deflect questions instead of answering them. I think the scientific method in science becomes absolute necessity at a certain point because, yes, everybody can start out with a hypothesis. That's the first step. The second one is design an experiment to test the hypothesis. And you keep going down and down and down, and you just keep repeating those steps until you finally come to a conclusion, and there's a cat. It jumps up on the desk. But I think the absolute last and most important thing in the scientific method is encourage others to try the experiment, because independent results and peer review is where it comes to life, because the human mind, the human senses, all of these things are so fallible. It's so easy to fool your brain. I'm sure you've looked at now the word escapes me, but like the brain teasers, the ones that'll trick you into seeing one thing when really it's another.
Right.
Sort of thing.
Like optical illusions and that kind of thing.
Yes, optical illusions. That's what was escaping me. They might as well call them brain failures, as Neil deGrasse Tyson puts it, because your brain hasn't evolved to understand these things. It's evolved to learn how to eat, learn how to mate, things of this nature.
And I want to ask you, just so I kind of get to know you on this kind of a level to understand where you're coming from. When you came to the point where you came to the conclusion that there was not a God, was it something that was based solely on science, or was there any kind of philosophy behind that as well?
It came to the point where, as I said, it was a very painful transition, because I grew up believing in God my entire life, but it came to the point where it was such disappointment, and then it just slowly progressed as I got to thinking and reading more and more and more, and my library tripled in size almost within just a couple of months, because I was reading so much and trying to think my way out of it, and anyway, it was more to it was the seed was disappointment. And I know preachers will be like, well, disappointments, and they'd go back to Job and things of that nature. But I think at a point, like, let's just take a Bible verse, for example. 1 Thessalonians 5:19 through 21, I believe it says, avoid every kind of evil, test everything. Test everything, avoid every kind of evil, and hold on to the good. And I believe those words still, even though I don't think the Bible in and of itself is a spiritual book. I think it's a historical record in a loose sense. But I think one should maybe look at it for the history of the Hebrew people. I think maybe the miracles, given it was largely passed on through mouth, could have been exaggerated for a long period of time. Some of the miracles don't seem scientifically possible. For instance, the shadow moving back 7 steps in Isaiah when he's talking to King Hezekiah, things of that nature. Right. But it came down to just a lot of thinking went into it. And it took forever to admit even the slightest doubt in the faith to myself, but it was a very slow process.
Well, and then this is the subject that we kind of want to go over today. Is the kind of discussion of faith versus science, the argument as a whole, because I think that's really going to be not only a building block, a foundation for the kind of topics that this show is going to cover, as well as things such as social and moral responsibility and things like that. But I also think that the importance of science is also going to be a place of common ground between the two of us, because I think that we'll share a lot of similar opinions when it comes to the realm of science. Like, for instance, I personally am not a believer in the idea of a young Earth.
Okay.
There's just way too much evidence out there for me to just blindly say, well, the records we have in the Bible, when calculated out, say we're only a few thousand years old, so therefore science must be wrong.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And and there's, and that's one of the big points that I want to come out in these conversations for myself is, in my opinion, it would be very difficult for any rational man to keep their faith if they were to push against science in this way when it came to any subject. I mean, mm-hmm. There's plenty of people that try to explain away the passages in that talk about how the Earth is flat, and I mean it's pretty clear in my view that the people who wrote these passages when they were alive, they clearly believed that the Earth was flat and circular and held up by real pillars, and we were in kind of like a snow globe kind of structure.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, no rational man today would think that that's the world we live in. And it surprises me that we don't see more people take the scientific discoveries that we've made over the years and apply those to question other things that were misunderstood, and figure out how that actually changes what we thought about the meaning behind stuff that's in the scripture and things like that.
Yeah. One time, I remember reading about one conversation Dr. Carl Sagan he had with the Dalai Lama, the 14th Dalai Lama. He said, what would happen if science disproved something big about Buddhism? And the Dalai Lama looked at him. He said, then Buddhism would have to change. And Dr. Sagan was like, well, what if it was something really big? What if it was something like reincarnation? And he said, and the Dalai Lama just smiled and he said, it's going to be really hard to disprove reincarnation. And I was like, that's pretty funny.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the thing, though. I mean, we don't have any kind of way of measuring the kinds of I don't know what the right word for it would be, but we have no way to peer into the world of the spiritual in a scientific way. If that spiritual world does indeed exist, we don't have any way of examining it, measuring it, testing it.
Mm-hmm.
So, unless we advance to a point in science when that becomes possible, when it comes to, the matter of proving one thing or another, it's still, it really, I think, still mostly belongs in the realm of philosophical debate rather than scientific debate, when you're just talking about the nature of the universe and whether or not that realm exists. Do you agree?
I would agree with that, yeah.
There was something on the edge of my mind, but it slipped. I'm really drawing a blank right now. I know there was something I was going to bring up, but it's escaping me at the moment.
All right. Well, I guess I could throw up a point while you're thinking there that I thought of while you were just now talking. When we observe electrons, you can't observe electrons, but once you detect electrons, you can detect them popping in and out of existence. Like they can be two places at once. These are very mysterious particles because quantum physics is just an entire mind. Pardon my language, but as Richard Feynman once said, he said, if you think you understand quantum physics, you don't understand quantum physics. and I mean, we can detect these electrons popping in and out of existence, like literally something coming from nothing. And on the physics level, physicists absolutely have to answer the question, what is nothing? And to a philosophical person, that'll seem like a stupid question, which from a philosophical sense, it really is. But from a physics, scientific, measurement-based system, we have to, given that we assert through the Big Bang that the universe sprang from nothing, we have to define what nothing is and then figure out what's on the other side of nothing. Right now, we have no idea. So I mean, you can go ahead and quote that, but even the biggest physicists in the world will tell you we don't know. But science works on the horizon. It doesn't. It's always on the frontier. It thrives on being proved wrong. If someone was to prove something incorrect in science, instead of being attacked for it, they would be given a big fat check and a medal.
Right.
Because I forget the name. It was I forget the name of the scientists themselves, but one scientist demonstrated, I think in like 1902, that an electron was a wave, and then his grandson comes along just a couple decades later and proves that electrons are a particle, and then a little bit later. Actually, it was his son that proved it was a particle, and then his grandson showed that it could be a particle and a wave. And that just seems like jargon, but at the same time, it's even within that singular ancestry there, science changed 3 times because we're always learning something. And the thing people don't understand about science is, yes, it thrives on being proved wrong. If you can prove us wrong, we're going to write you a check, and it doesn't matter how mundane or how important that theory is. If you found one rabbit fossil in the Precambrian layer of the Earth, one rabbit fossil, the entire theory of evolution would completely evaporate overnight, because evolution says that there are layers in the ground. As the Earth deposits those layers, fossils form, and those creatures that are buried there have to be in a certain order, or evolution isn't true. If we found a rabbit in the Precambrian, that's several million years before it even evolved, so that would be big.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that it trips a lot of us up when it comes to these kind of things. Is on the flip side is, whenever whenever Christians are confronted with the idea that we're wrong about something in our belief system, especially those of us who have grown up, in a society where that's been part of our lives for, pretty much since we've been born, there's been a knee-jerk reaction kind of instilled in us that says, well, no, I'm right about this. There must be something wrong with, what I'm being presented here.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why, to bring up your point earlier about, especially things like the Old Testament, how most of that was, it was passed on orally for so long before it was ever written down.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I'm just speaking for myself here, but that's why I take everything that's in that part of the Bible with a heavy dose of salt, not just a grain, but a heavy dose, because
I understand.
It's so, I can believe a lot of stuff that's in there. I can believe that, everything that was written down about the life of Christ happened just the way it was written in there without much problem. But, the idea of Adam and Eve and Noah happening exactly the way it was written, that's a little bit harder for me to swallow.
Yeah. I would have to agree, because I mean, if you really start looking at the genealogies there, and maybe Genesis 3 or 4, I think it's 4. You notice that Adam's second set of kids. What is it, Stephen? Maybe.
I'm not sure.
Cain killed Abel, and then the next Seth. That's it.
Right.
They moved off and took wives before it even mentions that Adam and Eve ever had children, other daughters. Of course, then you got to get into Hebrew culture. They really only record mainly the sons, because that's their lineage.
Right.
And that's fine from a cultural perspective. I mean, that definitely wouldn't stack up here in America today, because morality, I think, it evolves over time. Because let's say 200 years ago, slavery was the norm. It was completely normal. It was even justified with the Bible. But now it's completely reprehensible. I mean, you even say the wrong thing, and somebody's accusing you of being racist. And I mean, I agree. Slavery is horrible, and it doesn't matter the race. I mean, everybody's a free person. But then, there's several types of slavery in the Bible. You have to get into that. There's indentured servitude. Then there's true slavery, where the person is actual property. And I mean, there's a lot of questions you can throw at it, and there's very few answers that return to you. I guess is my entire point.
And one thing I want to, since you bring up the subject of changing morality with the times, this is one thing that I want to just kind of touch on real quick, not necessarily as an argument against anything that you're saying, but just it's one of those things that I feel that a lot of Christian debaters and things fail to properly express. And I definitely believe that there is such a thing as an absolute right and an absolute wrong, that even if there were no humans, you would still that such a thing as good and evil could still would still be something that could be clearly defined by God's standards. And what I have to say about the way that morality changes in our cultures, and why that doesn't, well, I'll just try to say it plainly. I do believe that it's not, on a personal level, for us as human beings, I don't believe that it is as important to have a full understanding of what is morally right and morally wrong as many people place on the idea of having that understanding. In my belief, I think that, especially if you look at the way that Christ taught when he was on earth, if you look at the way things were written, the way that he preached, I think that one of the biggest messages that he made during that time was, it's not in the knowing what's right and wrong. It's not in having a list of do's and don'ts. It's about the journey of what's the word I'm looking for? Self-improvement, of trying to reach that goal, knowing that you're never going to reach the goal of perfection, but, trying to grow and be a better person, to be more like Christ as your relationship with God develops. So it's, because another important thing to point out, I think, is that while the law, which, the law that was handed to Moses, a lot of people point to that when it comes to debate about morality, and say, well, how can God say it's okay for it you to do these kind of things when, us today would never do such a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I would agree, to do some of to stone people for some of the actions and things that things that you could be stoned for in that time.
Mm-hmm.
And this is kind of a difficult thing to express without sounding like you're contradicting yourself. But
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe that the law itself was, obviously with it being God's law, it can't be immoral, but that
Mm-hmm.
doesn't necessarily mean that the people who follow the law fully understood what the driving force
Mm-hmm.
behind it, but what made those laws the laws.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make any sense to you?
It does. I mean, especially from my reading in the Torah, which is the first 5 books, Moses.
Right.
I would say, I guess if I was still within, the believing realm, I mean, you take a look at Mount Sinai. God gave him 10 commandments, but then after that, you get into Numbers, and there's 613 laws of Moses.
Right.
I don't know a human on earth who can memorize that many laws.
Well, see, that was the point of the law. The point of the law was
Mm-hmm.
not to make the Jewish people holy by
Mm-hmm.
having the law. The point of it was, it was something for them to strive for, to give them something tangible, to give them direction, to strive for perfection, to be,
Mm-hmm.
an example to the rest of the world. But also for them on a personal level, it was there to prove to themselves that they cannot achieve that goal.
That makes sense. I guess the way science would answer that is have you heard of The Moral Landscape by Dr. Sam Harris?
That's not ringing any bells.
Okay, he actually wrote a book on how science can define morality, and it's an absolute wonderful book. One of his main points that he brings up pretty much right after the cover page is there a difference between the good life and the bad life? And there very much is, because if you take the Congo, you have drug-addled soldiers running around hacking people to pieces with machetes, and I mean, people are just morbidly afraid of their neighbors because they're afraid of getting killed. And everywhere you look, listen, I'm just using the Congo for example because there's thousands and thousands of places like this on Earth that this sort of thing happens, especially now with the whole barbaric ISIS thing. But if you look at it, it seems that society in the Congo has failed on every possible and conceivable level, because it has failed to produce productive human beings. It's failed to produce an education system, a life that people would actually strive to really want to live. And then you have someone here in the United States. If they're ultra rich, maybe the worst thing that's ever happened to them is being told that the car that they wanted doesn't come in red. And I mean, these are very real things to consider, because some people, that is the worst problem they've ever faced. But I mean, clearly both of them, I mean, if you grew up having to deal with drug-addled soldiers, you would learn how to avoid them if you're going to survive. But you would have to take a look at, is there a good life and the bad life? And then if you say yes, there is a difference between the good life and bad life, you have to ask why. So why is there a difference between the good life and bad life? Because the actions of people and the way they contribute and accumulate into a society there is an absolution to it. Don't murder, don't steal, don't kill, things like this are, I think, paramount to what can be considered moral. Obviously, I think somewhere along our lines that the rule of not killing people would come whether it had divine inspiration or not. Don't steal. That would probably prevent people from getting killed in certain situations. But Sam Harris, he goes into, yes, we can measure morality because there's things that people want to happen to them, like hugging their true love, and there's things people don't want to happen to them, like most recently the Jordanian pilot who got burned alive. If you take a serious look at this, so one's actions must be in line with a scientific morality, one that can be repeatable and never be really strayed from because we know it to be true, because it makes society better if you obey these rules.
Right, and that's a. I was listening to a discussion the other day about this very topic, and I think that I don't remember who it was I was listening to, but they put it very well that if you're coming at the idea of ethics or morals from a scientific standpoint, that you could arrive at many of the same conclusions as what is moral or ethical from a Christian standpoint, but the driving force behind that is different. And his point was that you have basically the two primary principles that drive those ethics. Number one is the survival of oneself and your species, and then number two would be quality of life for yourself, and that if you look at the kind of actions that would support these goals, you would find that you would make the same kind of decisions that you would if you believed in the same kind of moral ethics of modern day Christianity, for example. They're not going to line up perfectly because of certain issues like, say, gay marriage. That's not going to you could definitely have some conflict there when it comes to opinions on that as to whether it's moral or ethical or whatever. But on an overall sense, they would run very parallel with each other. And for someone from my perspective, that makes total sense, because I would think that if looking at it in a scientific way and believing that in a intelligent design of the universe, that yes, that would be the natural order of things, that we as a species would survive and thrive if we live and make decisions by those principles.
Yeah, it's you have to really get into it, and I think that gets back to my point on the scientific method, that you have to encourage others to make these decisions as well, because morality in China should be, at least in the logical sense, the same as morality here. You don't want to kill people in either places. You don't want to steal from people in either places. Of course, tell that to Wall Street here, but I mean, you just, of course, then you get into the other 10 commandments, like number one, there is no gods before me, and those are religious rules. And I think that's fine for the religious, but when it comes to morality, you brought up gay marriage, and I think that having a set of morals and beliefs is fine. You can think whatever you want to think because it's your mind. You're the lord of it, You're the master of everything that happens between your ears. Everyone is. Or at least I hope they are. Anyway, you get into, you can have whatever opinions you want, but when it comes into legislators forcing morality on certain people, I think there should be only scientific laws put into place, because there's really no evidence to support that a homosexual, is damaging anyone but himself. You get into Alan Turing. The man literally saved thousands of lives in World War I cracking code. And then what happens to him? He's chemically castrated for something that he did in private behind closed doors that affected no one. It's really sad. I think that religion has its place in faith. Some people detest the word religion, even the faithful, and I know I did whenever I was still Christian. But I think that there's a certain point where religion needs to be like, hey, okay, they're following those laws. Nobody's getting hurt. Nobody's getting stolen from. We'll follow our own laws, and that's fine. You get into the more more niche laws like don't boil a young goat in its mother's milk, don't wear clothes made of multiple types of fabric, things like that. It's and if you want to follow them to the letter, go right ahead if you can. But there's a certain point where people of other faiths and people of no faith, like myself, want to merely just be absent from those religious laws. And that's really all I see in the freedom from religion movement and things like that, because I don't think, and I study politics quite heavily here lately because it's kind of become my new worry stone. I don't see that religious freedoms are going anywhere in this country. There's just a line drawn in the sand where you can't bully people with it anymore. And there are bad Christians out there who try to bully people, but really the Christians that I know would never try to do that. They just like, okay, live your life,
Right. It's one of those vocal minority things where the loudest people are usually the fewest in number.
Yeah.
You see that a lot, and you can draw parallels, in our kind of, gaming culture. You see that a lot. You'll see on forums and things like that. The majority of the people might be happy, with a game or whatever, and they'll never touch the forums. It's the 2% that just want to rant and rave that are all the time, flaming on the forums and yelling and screaming and stuff like that.
Well, yeah, like with Warhammer, I mean, there's Bell of Lost Souls. Those guys, it's like a hive of complete butthurt. Like they don't like anything about the game, and I'm like, stop playing it. And it's like, let's take Westboro Baptist for instance. That's just 70 people in the middle of Kansas. I'm actually kind of a little bit offended for Christians because of these people getting all the PR. Like, there's like Pioneer Baptist here in our hometown. They go all the way to Africa taking medicine and food and people, and they make friends and they help people. And from a strictly humanist point of view, that is wonderful. Whatever philosophy it is that drives you to be that, rock on. I mean, it doesn't matter to me if you're worshiping a teapot circling Jupiter. I mean, if you're helping people because of what you believe, rock on, go for it. Personally, I help people because I think people is all we have. The human race has to survive. And the things we're learning in science right now, the human race probably isn't going to be around for very much longer if we just keep doing the things we're doing. And that's why I prescribe to the humanist philosophy, because, and to define humanism, a lot of people think it's a religion, and it's really not. It's a set of philosophy. I mean, there's religious humanists and then there's atheist humanists. And they all work towards the common goal of helping people. And that's all humanism is. And there's and I think just whatever it is that makes you do good in the world is okay. But if what you believe is making you do things like ISIS is, like the killing fields in Thailand, like those were atheists that did that. The killing fields, it was communism, and they just butchered hundreds of thousands of people. And like, so it gets down to a base morality. Is what you are believe even really in question? Because there's good and evil people in every social caste. And I think that there is a point where you have to be like, okay, this Christian's good, but this Christian's bad. This atheist is good, this atheist is bad. And you just got to quit categorizing it, because there's only really good and bad people, and it's really not really worth considering what they believe at certain points,
Right. And to go too deep into the subject, but there was something I wanted to comment on when you were talking about gay marriage and people using faith to to bully and things like that, and whatever. One thing, another. Obviously, we're not going too deep into any one topic so far today, but one of the things that I hope to cover eventually, is to go deeper into the idea that just because something is legal in our society doesn't necessarily mean that you have to condone it.
Yeah, exactly.
What I mean?
There's a lot of people that don't condone the legalization of marijuana. And, even if you get into the Bible, like, it doesn't even talk bad about smoking, let alone marijuana.
Well, another good example would be, blood transfusions. There are certain, there's certain sects or whatever of Christianity that believe that, that's a sin, that, you can't do that. And it's perfectly legal. Probably most people in this country would not even think twice about whether or not it would be a sin. But just because it's legal, that doesn't mean that group has to push for it to say, well, nobody should do this because we think that this is a wrong thing. And at the same time, nobody's forcing them to say you have to do this because you have no basis to say, that it is a sin.
Yeah, exactly. And it's from a scientific point of view, if you don't want to undergo the blood transfusion, it'll save your life from leukemia. That's your right to do so. Go ahead and, with respect, go ahead and just pass away. But and I have to draw the line on that statement when it comes to kids, because I think parents have a responsibility to see their kids survive, whether they're religious or not. And if you're denying your children vaccinations on a religious sense, I think that's wrong. And I don't know. And here's my question to you is, where does the line get drawn there? Because parents do have a right over the way they raise their children, but at the same time, if the parents are making the wrong choice about the child's survival, how do we mediate that?
That's one of those things. It's really hard for me to give a definitive answer on that because, on the one hand, you'll come to find that I usually, will look at things from two different perspectives whenever it comes to anything like this. On the one hand, on the religious freedom side, not necessarily that I believe that it's the right thing to do, but I also recognize I recognize the importance of them having the right to be able to say no to that, in the realm of, protecting religious freedom within the country. But at the same time, you're also talking about the health safety of our nation's children as a whole. And so on that side of it, at the same time, I want to protect my children from these diseases. And if, them not vaccinating their children puts my child at risk, even if they were vaccinated or whatever, I have the right to protect my own, children from harm or whatever. And I think that like with that issue in particular, I think that I would have to lean much more towards the idea of forcing vaccinations, even if they do believe it's religiously wrong, just for the sake of the fact that, you are talking about, it's one thing when your choices that you make based on your religious beliefs only affect yourself. But as you've mentioned, as I've kind of touched on there, when it comes to, an issue like this, you're talking about something that affects more than just yourself. It's affecting society around you and other people's right to life and the pursuit of happiness. And so even if you were to, take out the religious side of it, you've got a constitutional basis right there to force, them to have these vaccinations. And I think that even from a religious moral standpoint, you do kind of have that responsibility to, to keep you and your family safe from these kind of dangers. And as we kind of mentioned, it is if you do believe as these people do, then it makes it a much more difficult thing to talk about than you or I, because our views don't align with theirs. And that, as I mentioned, you do have that issue of protecting our right to believe whatever we choose to believe in this country.
Yeah.
So it's a very fine line in order to keep those ideas balanced.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, either if the needle swings too far either way, it's going to be a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's a big question. It really is. And I mean, I would have to say that, I mean, if you don't want to give your child the flu shot, it's a little bit different than not giving your child the polio vaccine.
Right.
I mean, you can kind of line item it, and the flu shot, I think Bill Maher put it like last week. He said it was 23% effective. And that's because they had, I read into this, and they actually had a lot more strains of it pop up this year. Usually the flu is pretty well under thumb, but this year they had like 7 or 8 different strains of it. And if the virus evolves, it evolves, and we got to figure out vaccinations for all of those.
Right.
So, or wait till a certain section of it dies down. And I mean, then you get into measles, and measles it can be very deadly, especially to children. Then you get scarlet fever, all these that kind of died out in the 1800s because we started discovering medicines for them. They're kind of coming back, and that's kind of scary.
Yeah.
Because to me, it's kind of that last step of the scientific method. I mean, once you stop practicing science, stop practicing a healthy set of skepticism, I mean, society can just fall apart,
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely true. I mean, and as I've mentioned, that's one of my biggest gripes with those that that are vocal in their support in Christianity is the failure to take that fully into account and take off the blinders, so to speak, on the preconceptions of what is truth and things of that nature.
I think as you said earlier, that there definitely is an absolute truth but can we ever completely grasp it? Well, science kind of says no, because the universe is so big, there's no way we can learn it all. I mean, even if our species endures for eons, there's still so much more that we can learn. But it really comes down to, yes, there's an absolute truth. No, we can't ever grasp it. But at the same time, we really have to try, because the more we learn, the better our lives get. But then you got to take into account that science also gave us the atomic bomb, and then later after that, the thermonuclear bomb. And to me, thermonuclear bombs are just horrifying. A lot of people don't realize what those things are capable of. The first explosion that they set these things off, it literally sank an island in the Pacific Ocean.
Mm-hmm.
2 new elements were created on the periodic table, einsteinium and fermium, and you felt the tremors 500 miles away in California.
Yeah. And to comment real quick on what you just brought up, I think that's also, the idea of not being able to discover that absolute truth is also true from a faith standpoint, because, if you believe in the teachings that are in the Bible and the fact that salvation is something that comes about by faith, if we were to somehow find a way to scientifically prove that God does exist, either salvation would then become essentially impossible, or he would have to give us new guidelines on how to reach that state of being.
Yeah, and to a degree, I mean, and these are just my thoughts on it. Like, if if it did turn out that there was a God, I mean, I'd have some very pointed questions for this being, of course, being, what I've seen and where I've been. But the question is like maybe nothing would change, because at the same time he did, if he exists, create everything we can see. So a lot of this pretty much has to be his plan already, and to a degree it would make sense that nothing would change. It would just be like, told you so,
Well, I mean, if the prophecies that are, if the way that I understand them, the way that the way that they've been written, that makes in the translation, that might not be the best word, but if the take on them is true, then that you do have that point in time where after the tribulation and all that,
mm-hmm.
he would come down, and Christ would have that 1,000-year reign where he's actually
mm-hmm.
ruling for in a physical body with a real world government for that 1,000 years.
Mm-hmm.
But again, that's something different than us just being like, oh hey, look what I found. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, definitely. It would be. I mean, yeah, that's kind of how science works. Is the hey, look what I found. But to a degree, if religion is true, yeah, sure, the prophecy is going to come true. But at the certain point, I guess my question, without getting too far in depth of the morality of God, would be, well, what is this perfect plan, and what makes it perfect? Like, as I said, I've been to Africa, and if you look at Johannesburg, it is the truest city of contrast you will ever see in your entire life. Like, you can't get contrast like this looking on Google. On one side of the street, there is multi-million-dollar fortresses that these people have made and built for themselves. And then on the literal other side of the street, you'll see Kaya Sands squatter camp, and their houses are literally constructed of trash. And I have to question, and of course, I quoted 1 Thessalonians early, question everything.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get into Hosea 4:6. It says, my people are destroyed by lack of knowledge and understanding. And I think that's true, and from a scientific point of view, we're destroyed by a lack of science. We're destroyed by a lack of knowledge and understanding. Like, for instance, the life expectancy of a human used to be 35 years. Now it's pushing 80 on absolute average. So, I mean, science just within the last couple generations has doubled the human lifespan. And I mean, I don't think that's small dice. And I think when it comes down to, maybe when it comes to faith, that I think God has a certain responsibility to the creation. I guess I would have to ask this being, what's up with, childhood leukemia, things like that. And I mean, this is not me bashing Christians. This would be my questions of a God. And I guess from my unbelief standpoint, I'm fairly comfortable that if the being does exist, that he will know that this is not rebellion on my part. A lot of people would be like, oh, you just want to live a sinful lifestyle. No, it's not the case at all. In fact, my life really hasn't changed at all. I mean, I'm still a nerd,
Yeah.
So,
but I mean, that's a common thing, even believer or non-believer, is this question of, if he is the kind of being that we believe him to be, how could he allow these kind of things to happen, these horrible things?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm glad you brought it up, because this is another one of those subjects that I think that that even really educated people, I think, fail on some level to give a decent answer for.
Mm-hmm.
And since you brought it up, if you don't mind, I'll spend a little bit of time just sharing my viewpoint on this. I'm not necessarily saying it's right, but this is the conclusion that I've come to, and it could change down the road, but it's what makes sense to me. Is In order for you to answer this question and for it to be an acceptable answer,
Mhm.
it only works if you do believe that that God does exist.
Mhm.
And if you just take that as given, then
Mhm.
I think you first look at what is the purpose of humans? Why are we put here in the first place? And the reason why we were created was so that um, uh, God could have a relationship,
Mhm.
period. Because before there was no, that was not something that he had because it was just him.
Mhm.
So, all right, that is the purpose of us being made, and we, as humanity, are being we're growing and being forged as time goes on. I think that if you look at the relationship between God and um, uh, early people, it doesn't matter whether you take the Old Testament as literal or figurative. Either way, the same basic truth still holds, that the relationship between him and his people during that time was purely a relationship between father and child.
Mhm.
You look at the way that people that he um, that it's written that he punished people, the way that the relationship worked between him uh, and those who followed him. Mostly you only see the Jews, but that they weren't the only people.
Mhm.
But that's another topic. But anyway, as time goes on, you look at when Christ shows up, and that relationship changes, and you start to enter into a sort of adolescent period of that relationship between us and him, where we're given a bit more responsibility, we're given a bit more freedom in um, you know we're we're not treated as harshly when we walk outside the bounds of what he says to do and don't do. Just like you would raising a child. Once your child starts to enter into his teenage years, you start giving them a bit more freedom to start to learn things for themselves, to become better people. um, and you fast forward to now, I don't think that we've necessarily progressed too far past that point, and one of the reasons why I don't think the rapture is anywhere close to now,
Mhm.
just because I don't think that we've, as um, humanity as a whole, has matured to the point to where um, he's ready to kick off the last bit
Mhm.
of the development of that relationship. And you fast forward to once everything's said and done, and you have a recreated heaven and earth and all that, and it's just when sin's wiped out and all that, and you have that relationship between God and his people, that will be a fully mature relationship that covers every facet that we experience on earth. um, that is the ultimate goal, is
Mhm.
to get that. And the tool for the development of us as humanity, is the existence of evil, of allowing that to exist.
Mhm.
And if you do believe in this, in an eternal life, then and again, this is easier for someone like me to say, not having lived the kind of lives that people in areas like Johannesburg and stuff may have lived. But
Mhm.
with that eternal perspective, um, even the worst life that you could live on this earth, if you live for an eternity, then whatever you suffered is just going to be an infinitesimal speck of your lifetime as a whole.
Mhm.
But those experiences, as awful as they may be now, and as terrible as they might be, can be used to forge us on a personal level, to make us be something greater than we could ever be without those experiences. Just
Mhm.
like how you would, and it's not a perfect parallel, because I'm not saying that he does these things to punish people, because that's not the case. I'm not saying he makes children have cancer or anything like that to punish them or their families or whatever. But, just in the way that, as a child is developing, you have to punish them. You have to introduce pain so that they become a decent adult down the road. Without that pain in that ultimately small part of their lives, they cannot become a good, from a moral standpoint, decent human being.
Yeah, I think my stance is, I think, of course you said introduce pain is somewhat of a discipline. I think it should be like a last resort, and that's just kind of my thing, and I'm still kind of on the fence about that, so I'm just going to go ahead and just give a, I don't know, because I ain't afraid to admit it. When it comes down to these horrific things, science through evolution and biodiversity and just downright I guess you can say Murphy's Law, these are the sort of things you would expect. These are the sort of things that you would expect in a system that evolved from simpler common ancestors. Because, yeah, you have the drug-addled soldiers because they become addicted to drugs and the adrenaline gets them high as well, and they just want to go off on something. And I'm not saying this is a good thing. I'm just saying this is just one of the horrific things that you'd grow to expect to see at some point in this world. But at the same time, you see pretty much the whole of humanity kind of just getting along with each other, because these systems evolve as well. Like the United States government, I mean, it took a long time. I mean, if you look at the history of democracy, it started in Greece. If it wasn't for the 300 fighting off Xerxes, democracy might not have existed in the first place at this time, And, it's so many different, I mean, there's so much data to consider when you're thinking about these sort of things, and you can really only focus on one feature at a time without having your brain melt. But, because there's just so much data. But if you think about it, like the Greeks, you can look at warfare. The Greeks invented naval warfare. What happened from there? They mastered the Mediterranean and moved on. And then you look at another side of life. You look at aggression in the human brain. You'll find societies have a whole lot more people to them whenever the adrenal glands are a little bit smaller, because people just don't go off on each other and kill each other, because our brain, like currently, even the best of us as humans, like our prefrontal cortex is too small and our adrenal glands are too large. And you said before, I think the show, maybe even after the show started, that you were looking for a discussion where, you can have, without getting offended at each other, with disagreements and stuff. Mm-hmm. Very few humans can really do that. It's kind of outside of their ability. It's not really a choice. It's just, their ideas are challenged and they, on the personal level, feel threatened, and then they lash out. And I guess on the personal level, I am not threatened by having my, opinions, challenged, because I know I have to be wrong about something. Mm-hmm. And I can't be right about everything. I mean, I'm just a normal human like everybody else. So you really have to get into the brains of these people. And some people, I think when you get to consider serial killers, maybe they're just sick. Maybe, they just need science to come along and discover a cure for being addicted to killing people or something like that. Because everything that we are crystallizes between our ears, for better or worse. I mean, a lot of people look at, the difference between chimps and humans as far as their DNA. Their DNA is within 3% of each other. It would take multi-PhD just to tell one from the other by looking at, a data slide of each. Mm-hmm. You could, to a degree, I mean, I kind of feel like I'm losing my track of thought here, but, maybe maybe it's just in our heads, and we have to figure out how to steer around our human nature, because if evolution is true, we're still animals. We are animals, but we are capable of a lot more. Science, to a degree, says, there's no free will, because, we're just biochemical machines, and we really, there's really no free will, but at the same time, there's so many factors to consider, it's really not worth taking that question seriously, because everybody's still unique anyway,
Yeah, and that's one of those things that and obviously not everyone who's an atheist believes in that opinion, and I think that there's plenty of good evidence that says that we have no free will, that just can't be true.
Mm-hmm.
And I could be wrong. I'm not, pulling this from any kind of study or anything, but,
Mm-hmm.
just thinking about it, I can't think of an instance where animals intelligently choose to, take their own lives in the way that humans sometimes do.
Yeah. And, and that's there's let's see. Well, let's take a look at Charles Darwin. And a lot of people called him a racist for this statement, but it's not true. He set sail on the HMS Beagle, and he opposed the captain's racism to such a degree he literally almost got thrown into the ocean. The captain hated his guts. And then they get to I think it's the Bahamas. And anyway, he sees this female slave. She's a black lady, and she, instead of submitting to her masters, chooses to dive off a cliff and kill herself. And he said that he just greatly respects that, because she would rather live free for a couple of seconds than live as a slave for years. And it's and that comes down to maybe her brain just completely rejected servitude to a degree that it was just suicide,
Right. And I think that I don't mean to cut you off, but
it's fine.
That does show a direct what's the word I'm looking for? A conflict between, what you'll see in the evolution of,
Mm-hmm.
say, animals. Where
Mm-hmm.
did dogs come from? They were, we believe, many scientists believe that, they were, basically wolves that, found that by coexisting with humans and eventually becoming servants of humans, that it better fit their survival.
Mm-hmm.
And by following that evolutionary track, we now have the domestic dogs that we have today. Mm-hmm. But that's, like you just pointed out, there's something about the idea of freedom and having a free will that we will destroy ourselves to protect that right, even though it completely goes against everything that evolution would drive us to make choices by.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that comes with, of course, when you get into Daniel Dennett, he really makes the point. He says that consciousness isn't just one trick. It's an entire big bag of tricks that just kind of intertwine with each other. And to a degree, animals don't really have that huge bag of tricks. They have it on a similar level. It's pretty clear that dogs have emotions, because they kind of freak out every time they see you because they're happy,
Yeah.
Just drop the phone. But it's and I think it's pretty. You can see camels cry and things like that, but maybe it gets to the point where humans are really the only ones capable of taking their own lives, and considering that option. I guess is my point.
Yeah, because you can see evidence of they might sacrifice themselves to save their young or something like that. That's that's obviously not what we're describing here. We're talking about taking your life based on a principle, not based on survival of yourself or a member of your species. And I think that that's one of those big differentiating factors.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
It really does, it does show that there is some kind of fundamental difference between human beings and animals. At least in my viewpoint, obviously I would believe that, we are somehow set apart, by God. But even from a scientific point of view, I do believe that you do have evidence such as that shows, besides the fact that we can communicate and, invent and, develop culture and all that there is on a much more fundamental, basic level, something that separates us from the rest of the animals on our planet.
And I think to a degree, if you take the Latin term Homo sapien, it means man with big brain. That's the literal translation, Homo erectus, man who stands up straight. But then you take a look at other mammals, like dolphins. Recently, we figured out quite a bit about dolphins. They're very fascinating creatures. I mean, and that's before we figured out what I'm about to say. Like we've noticed, we actually found a family of them, swimming alongside and holding up an older one that was having trouble swimming. It was, on the last leg of its life. It was about to die of old age. And these dolphins were actually demonstrating what humans could call sympathy and charity to a degree. They were helping this dolphin swim. Then there's a science paper I was reading not too long ago. Orangutan has actually been taught how to spearfish, and it was using a spear to actually catch fish, and it was successful in that. And then I think it's capuchin monkeys. Not too long ago, they've started studying the sounds they make when certain things are around, and they've kind of realized that it makes this sound that's to the equivalent of cuckoo, and that means a hawk is nearby. Because they noticed that sound always comes out of their mouths when they notice a hawk is nearby. So it has to at least mean aerial predator to a degree. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I think there's billions of variables to it all, but at the same time, humans are much more advanced because, technology has allowed us to do that and grow to mastery over the world, and, but at the same time, if we didn't have all that technology, and we were still on the plains of Africa, we probably wouldn't be too much different than anything else. We have better reasoning abilities, but I think, when it comes down to the fundamentals like emotions and sympathy and just all around desire to survive, you would see that we're fairly the same as other animals.
Yeah, and I would agree with most of what you're saying, because I do believe that a lot of what we see as I don't know what a better way to phrase it right now, but traits of a living being, of things like emotions and things like that. A lot of that is biologically driven, right? Mm-hmm. We do know that a lot of this stuff is has some kind of biological basis. We know that things happen with the body when we experience certain emotions and things like that, and you can induce those emotions, through things like drugs and things like that. So it's it's obviously not all something that happens within, say, the spirit of a person. And obviously I do believe in the existence of a soul and all that, but I also think that without the body, if we were to somehow be able to exit our body and exist without it for a time and then come back in, it would be a very, very difficult thing to describe to somebody what that would be like, because I don't think that because since we have existed within a material body all our lives, it would completely shock us what an existence without that connection to a biological mechanism would be like. And that's why I don't think, there's plenty of scientific evidence to show that things like near-death experiences and things like that are much more biological trick rather than a supernatural experience.
Mm-hmm.
Not that I'm discounting supernatural experiences, but a lot of those things that people attribute to that,
Mm-hmm.
we're starting to be able to better explain them scientifically.
Mm-hmm.
And, I guess my point is that it doesn't surprise me to see these kind of similarities between us and animals when it comes to things like emotion and, to some level, communication,
Mm-hmm.
and things like that, because to me that still doesn't it doesn't disprove or in any way diminish
Mm-hmm.
the existence or the value of the human soul.
Yeah, and one of the big things that people don't quite get about science is that it's impossible to prove a negative. You can either demonstrate that something exists or you just can't.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's no way to prove that there isn't a God. There's no way to really prove that there isn't a Santa Claus, but you can know it's extremely unlikely.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, of course, if you ask Jason, that Santa Claus is real. But to us, we know the trick behind it. And
Yeah.
so it's a perception thing to a degree, and at the same time, it's, can we even know? Because if there is, we have no way of knowing, as you said earlier. And of course, I forgot to kind of fill out my point on the electrons, is that we can detect them popping in and out of existence. And well, what's on the other side of existence? I mean, there might be something. Who knows? We don't know yet. Some physicists would assert that the entire universe is a projection, a hologram, and they've actually started testing for that, actually. And I don't know I don't think they've come upon anything, because it'd be a pretty big finding if they did.
Yeah. But to me, if they were, again, not to cut you off,
that's fine.
But if they were to find that kind of theory, or some version of it was true, to me that wouldn't be too much of a surprise, because again, for someone like me to find out that there is, for lack of a better word, a different realm from which matter comes into existence, wouldn't it be a big surprise to me? Obviously I believe that there is a spiritual realm, and to me the idea of matter being some sort of manifestation of that other realm, if they were to find that, it would, not only would it not contradict what I believe, but I think it would also very well fit into how I perceive the universe and creation as I understand it.
Yeah, and I mean, as I said before, I mean, scientists have no idea what came before the Big Bang. I mean, you ask any respectable scientists, and they're going to say, I don't know. Then, I mean, we get into superstring theory. Dr. Brian Greene, he's working on that with an army of other physicists. And, I mean, and if you take, well, like you and I, we're used to 4 dimensions, one, length, width, height, and time. And the crazy thing about string theory is it doesn't work in 3 dimensions of space and 1 of time. It works in 10 dimensions of space and 1 of time. And the math predicts that there's these pocket dimensions folded into the others. And it's absolute insanity to a degree, but at the same time, they haven't actually figured out if it's true or not. Any respectable string theorist is going to tell you, well, this is just what we got for now. We really don't know if this is true. If we do figure out how to test it, I mean, that's cool. I mean, awesome. But
yeah,
you are also dealing with the subatomic. I mean, we're talking 42 orders of magnitude smaller than anything that we can really see. If you took a single atom, and this is just what the math predicts in string theory, if you took a single atom and blew it up to the size of the observable universe, one of the strings of string theory would only be about the size of a tree here on Earth. So we're talking very, very small. The Planck length is what they're getting into, and science has to answer these questions, because it's driving us crazy not to know the answers.
Right.
And we have to answer those questions, not so much that people will take us seriously, but just because we have a thirst to know.
Mm-hmm.
And if we ever figured that out, I mean, string theory would solve the problem between quantum physics and macrophysics. Macrophysics being the planets flying around in space and orbiting the sun and all that. But right now, quantum physics and macrophysics, it doesn't actually marry. Like, you can't scale it down smoothly. Like, the two theories reject each other, and we're not sure where we're wrong. So science has a great deal left to learn, and there's a lot of maybes that can be thrown up in it, but we just can't take seriously what we don't know to be true, and can't, and as I said, the last step of the scientific method is to encourage others to try the experiment. And if we can't encourage others to try the experiment, then it's just an idea for now. And that's where science differs, I believe, from faith, because faith is comfortable thinking something's true without actually really feeling the need to prove it to themselves, because it's just true to them. But science, we just don't have that luxury, and it's to a degree we have to say that we are chained to humility. We have to say that we are just, we don't know.
Yeah. And to a degree, I would say that, you're absolutely right about that, in that essentially that is the easy way out for the believer, is to just be comfortable in what you understand and what you believe. Mm-hmm. But, I think that it's, I believe that it's extremely important for your growth as a person to constantly be challenging your own faith and to be questioning your own beliefs. I think that to some degree, some people are afraid to do that. They're afraid that if they do that, then that they might lose their faith, and the idea of that scares them. And for good reason. I mean, you've talked about, you've touched on what a difficult experience it was for you to lose your faith, and what a rough time it gave you. And it's no wonder why anybody would be afraid of that. And, ever since I was, 12 years old and started asking these questions, the ideas, horrified me, when I came to the realization, I could be wrong. I could just cease to exist when I die, and that could be it. What does that mean, to me? How does that affect how I live my life and make my choices? And, obviously I've still held on to my faith. I've still come to the conclusions that, I definitely believe that there is a God, and I believe that it's, at the very least, highly probable that a supreme being exists. Even if I'm completely wrong about my idea of who God is and his personality and, things of that nature, even if I was completely wrong about all that, I would still very, very firmly believe that there is a supreme entity that transcends time and space, that, has set everything in motion, and it has had a hand in every bit of the creation of the universe as we know it.
Yeah, like, see, Brian Greene, he was talking with Richard Dawkins, and anybody who's really got into this subject to any degree has probably heard of Richard Dawkins. He's somewhat of a severe old man. Let's just go ahead and say it. But he was having a conversation with Brian Greene, and if I ever meet Brian Greene, I'm probably going to pass out and urinate all over myself, because I just love this guy so much. He's a great guy. He has a free online course if you're interested in the physics I've been talking about. It's worldscience.com. It's free. You get to watch his physics lectures absolutely free. Anyway, he said, and see, Dawkins isn't just an atheist, he's an anti-theist. He doesn't want to live in a world with a God. And he and Lawrence Krauss, and that's fine. That's that's their opinion. But Brian Greene, he said, he was like, if we get to that point, and he said, and I feel silly for saying this because I don't believe this, but if we ever get to the point where there is a God, I'll be like, okay, cool.
Right.
Because I mean, that's just, I think a good scientist goes where the evidence leads, no matter what it is. In science, there's nothing sacred. I mean, there's things that you have varying degrees of certainty about certain things. I mean, we're pretty darn sure that splitting the hydrogen atom is a potentially destructive thing, because I mean, look at Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, we don't know if string theory is true. So,
right.
So yeah, I mean, there's always going to be like varying degrees of certainty, no matter which subjects you're talking about, because if you're going to say that you absolutely think something's true 100%, then you're kind of setting yourself up for failure to a degree, because as I said earlier, I mean, you've seen the definition of what an electron is change within just a couple of generations of the same family. Like, these three physicists kept disproving each other. Like, the grandson disproved his father, and he So, and then one thing I meant to comment on that you said earlier, Carl Sagan, one time he was talking about one of his lectures about the difference between the dimensions. You said it would be pretty much impossible to describe what an out-of-body experience is. And I was about to speak up, but I didn't want to interrupt. To a degree, I think that would be like trying to explain what the sun looks like to a blind man, somebody who was born blind. So, when it comes to perception, I mean, you'd have to have something at least relative to whatever you're trying to describe it.
Mm-hmm.
So Carl Sagan, he's like, well, the fourth dimension, I can't show you which direction that's in, but I can show you the third,
right,
and the second and the first. But if you took the second dimension people or whatever, if they're, would be, he says, here's your flat land, your flat houses and everything, but just imagine one of them gets blown up in the air and experiences third dimension, and he comes back and trying to tell his flat neighbors about this, and he's like, but he has no adjectives to describe it.
Right. And I think you can see that, if you in instances in the Bible where you have any kind of prophecy, like what's in Revelation or anything like that, where someone supposedly stepped into the spiritual realm and saw things in the spiritual realm. You listen to their description of things, and they just, if you just look at them on the surface, they just do not make any sense, which, of course, how could they if you were seeing something from that perspective? Yeah, and there was another point I was going to bring up, but it's escaped me again, so.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah, I mean, it's, I fully embrace where the evidence would lead me. And I do, and this is why I'm not a militant atheist. I don't see really the value in trying to talk people out of their faith. I will answer questions if they're put to me, but when it comes to, it might be in poor taste, but evangelizing, I don't seek to convert people to atheism, because, I mean, what's to convert them to? I mean, you just, I feel like now the only real change in my personality is that I now have to give my own life the purpose that I choose to give it. Instead of just discovering it one day in God's plan, I have to make choices that either improve or damage my life. And I feel like I get purpose out of life by investing in my family, investing in my soon-to-be wife. And and yes, these are fleeting moments, but at the same time, kind of like, rest his soul, if you will. Leonard Nimoy, his very last tweet last week after he passed, before he passed anyway, was perfect moments can be had, but never preserved except in memory. And I think that perfection is up to definition. To me, perfection is just laying on the couch with my family watching Vikings or Game of Thrones, or, you know.
Yeah. And you know that's you brought up the word evangelism,
Mm-hmm.
and I feel like that's something I need to touch on just real quick.
Mm-hmm.
Because I do think that if people listen to our conversations and they start to hear my viewpoints and how open I am to the idea of being wrong and not trying to convince other people of how I'm right,
Mm-hmm.
I can very easily see somebody questioning, well, how can you call yourself a true Christian? Because if you take that stance,
Mm-hmm.
are we not called to evangelize to others and to try to convert them?
Mm-hmm.
And I just would like to preemptively head that off by saying, I don't think that one contradicts the other.
Mm-hmm.
In my, because, if you understand salvation as we can understand it, you know that there's nothing that we do to make that happen.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that's completely between a person and God, and that's
Mm-hmm.
any role that we play in that is just as a tool of God in to fulfill that purpose.
Mm-hmm.
So just to even think that you could ever say that you converted someone to not necessarily Christianity, but converted them into being a born again human.
Mm-hmm.
We have no power to do that. But what we can do is we can share our thoughts and our beliefs as we understand them. And if God uses these words and these actions to lead someone to Him and to forge that relationship between Him and them, then that's awesome, and I'd love to be a part of that. But I'm not going to be so I don't know, prideful or narcissistic, or I can't think of the perfect word for it, but
Mm-hmm.
not so conceited, I should
Mm-hmm.
say, as to believe that I have the power to do
Mm-hmm.
that for someone. Does that make
Mm-hmm.
if that makes any sense to you?
Oh, it does. It does. Yeah. I mean, to me, I'm very laid back. I'm very live and let live. And honestly, one of my I guess you could say, some people would call it a quirk, but to me, I call it a boon. One of the boons of my personality is I like to surround myself with people who disagree with me. That's one of the biggest things I love about my soon-to-be wife, is that she will tell me when I'm wrong. She will tell me, and I mean, I'm sure a lot of women will, but she doesn't just tell me I'm wrong. She'll actually speak to me and have a conversation with me and tell me why she thinks I'm wrong. And the structure of that is very, very important to me, because I know I'm not right about everything. It's impossible to think that I am. But if you only surround yourself with people who agree with you, you're never learning anything. So I think it's very important that to in a certain sense, you have to maintain that mental struggle. Because, for example, let's take an experiment in science. Just recently, they constructed a utopia for mice. These mice literally had to do nothing but eat.
That.
And this is very fascinating, because this shows that, I mean, the struggle is kind of what's keeping us alive. They constructed a utopia for these mice, and I think they started out with 90, and these mice literally had to do nothing but eat and have fun and play. And that's all they did. And their population kept growing to about 2,200, and then they just started to die off. After a certain generation, they lost all their natural instincts. They lost everything that would keep them alive in any sense, and they just died off. It was.
Well, not to mention the kind of caste system that kind of formed before that happened, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's kind of just it's really interesting to look at.
And it didn't just happen once. It happened like 24, 25 times, something like that?
I actually didn't read that part, but that would make sense because if you look into the Lenski experiments, I think his name's Anton Lenski, but I think he's Georgia Tech. He's credited for being the man who bottled evolution, and he has, and if you, in a sense, you can predict evolution now because that's how we maintain our vaccines. You predict the evolution of a virus or a bacteria, and you introduce this in a broken, and this is why there's formaldehyde in some of the vaccines, is because it's weakening these things. And on their level, it's absolutely devastating. But on our level, just a tiny little bit of formaldehyde isn't a bad thing. Like the human body, it's 0.00003 arsenic, which we know to carbon-based life forms, arsenic is very deadly.
Right.
It's absolutely just end game. But Lenski, he's bottled evolution for I think it's 30,000 generations of E. coli now, and around generation number 20,000, he's seen just massive change. And I hate using the phrase all of a sudden when it comes to evolution because you kind of need to remove that from your vocabulary in order to fully understand it.
Right.
But they had always kept citrate in the petri dishes. And just within just a few generations there, around 20,000, they just learned all of a sudden how to digest and take in the citrate, which would be akin to us eating rocks.
Right.
And then their population just took off. They no longer had just a few 100,000 cells or whatever. They had millions in the same petri dish at the end of the day. Every day they're freezing new generations and then baiting another generation to grow in a test tube. And they have roughly 8.3 generations in a single day. So you're seeing evolution kind of in a fast forward motion because of what they're seeing. And he's been doing this for 20 years. So 20, 30 years even, because his grad students are all given this task. And he just kind of masters the plan. And he can go back and he can look at each and every generation if he wants to and see these key changes that are accumulating over time, and then one or two starts taking the nibble of that citrate. Just one or two, and then finally, one just comes along that might be able to metabolize it just a little bit better. And finally, 20,000 generations later, you have citrate-eating E. coli.
Right. And, it's exactly studies like this that, it surprises me when I come across people that completely reject the idea of, they hear the word evolution, they immediately shut their ears off. Because, obviously, I don't believe that that's the ultimate source of life, that, one way or another, God created us, whether he used evolution as a tool or whether, he, kicked off the universe with the Big Bang and at some point blessed our species with consciousness. However it happened, he was directly involved in it. There's way too much evidence that shows that creatures adapt in this fashion to completely discount it. Now, whether or not it can create completely new species, if there is anything that shows concrete evidence that definitely has happened, I haven't seen it. Not to say that it's not out there, but I've not run across it.
If you take a look at just dogs within the last few thousand years, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to see the difference between a Chihuahua and a Great Dane. Yes, they have a lot of the same things, but at the same time, you can tell a very stark difference between them. And this is what's called artificial selection, not necessarily natural selection that Darwin set down, because we did this. We chiseled their genome, and we didn't even really know what we were doing. A farmer one day just decided, hey, that one's better at sniffing things down than the other one, and he bred that one and not the one. And that's artificial selection. The one that could smell better got bred and rewarded with more children, And that's how these little, and they just accumulate over time.
Right.
And this is, if you take a look at dogs, this is, I think that's the biggest thing that convinced me of evolution, is because dogs, they can be bred to be just about anything we need them to be. Like, I mean, some dogs are big enough to be kind of small ponies.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And, I definitely, agree with what you're saying there. But when I say, a new species, I'm talking more something along the lines of, bird to dinosaur, those kind of big leaps. And obviously, those would, if evolution does work in that way, it's over an extremely large amount of time compared to how long we've been studying, this theory and everything. So, I guess the point I'm trying to make is just, until I do see the scientific evidence that really makes it irrefutable that you do see those kind of huge changes, I'm going to be highly skeptic of that as a possibility.
That's very good. I mean, question everything. I think that's any intelligent man's lifestyle, is just question everything. From what I can tell, when it comes to reading on evolution, you take, like, you wanted to go from dinosaurs to birds. Well, we can pretty much look at the Chicxulub asteroid crater in Mexico, and we can see that it's a very large object hit the Earth. And I mean, the crater itself is 200 and something miles wide. So just imagine how much dust that threw up into the atmosphere. And that would clearly shadow out most of the sunlight and make it very hard for plant growth to take off. Then, of course, it takes roughly 2,000 calories to power a human body for a day, is, what, the cereal box says. But just imagine how many calories it takes to fuel one of these massive, let's just say Tyrannosaurus rexes or what have you.
Right.
We're talking about damage to the food chain. And a lot of people say the dinosaurs went extinct, and really they didn't. They just evolved to be more contoured to their new thing. Because take a look at certain dinosaurs. I mean, if you take a look at a dog having puppies today, there's usually going to be a runt. And, well, let's just say that there's very little plant food to eat around, so the runt requires fewer calories, even if it's just a small amount fewer. And therefore, it's going to be more well fed by the same meal that its brother is starving to death from. Mm-hmm. And then its brother doesn't get rewarded with as many children because it doesn't have the energy to produce, or it just starves and dies. And that just keeps happening. That runt just keeps having kids down through the generations. And sooner or later, you go from being this massive creature to being a Chihuahua instead of a Great Dane. Mm. And you see just these very, very small changes accumulate into very interesting things.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, like I said, I definitely get where you're coming from, and obviously, on a on that level, you can see those kind of generational changes in a relatively short period of time. Mm-hmm. But again, it's an order of magnitude difference between going from, one size to another with some slight, physical differences to being an entirely different type of creature altogether.
So like a reptile to mammal, sort of? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I've actually got a couple books on it if you want to read on it, but it's really a fascinating process, and the reason I bucked against it at first when I was losing my faith was that I was no longer the center of the universe, that I was just a bag of bones and meat walking around for an unknown amount of time.
Right.
So and it's when you really start to think evolution is true, you have to realize that you're not special to a degree, but you make yourself special. You can give your own life meaning.
Well, like I said before, even if I'm, even if all this is right, that even if life started from single cells and evolved, in the way that mainstream evolution theorizes that it did, that still would not, it would not harm my faith. You know what I mean? It would still completely be within the realm of possibility that was just simply the way in which creation was, the way it happened.
Oh yeah, and I mean that's cool. I could accept that myself if it was shown to be true. The one thing though, like and this is something I believe far back when I was a Christian. Like Isaiah 42:5, it says, "I am the Lord your God who created the universe and stretched them out." For that very verse right there, I don't actually think that Big Bang challenges Christianity, because created it, stretched it out. I mean, we're seeing its expanding universe right there, just as we're seeing in our telescopes today. So right. I don't think that Big Bang actually challenges Christianity. So, I mean, it's kind of on par with what you're saying there, is it really wouldn't damage your faith if it was shown to be true.
I mean, if anything, let's say that the Big Bang is true. If anything, to me, what that would show me is the incredible magnitude of intelligence of God to be able to basically set off a cosmic firecracker and have everything be in such a perfect place that this explosion creates the universe that we have today with the the laws of physics and the order that there is to everything from this cosmic explosion. To me, the idea that every little atom was planned out in that event is just an incredible thought.
Yeah, the one thing a lot of people the reason it's called Big Bang is somebody was actually making fun of it back in the 1930s on a radio show. Well, much like this one. He was like, well, maybe this is just this Big Bang. And really, if you really start looking at the physics of it, if it was anything, it wasn't an explosion. It was just quantum fluctuation. And quantum physics, as we discussed earlier, is very, very weird. As you've seen, we can see electrons popping in and out of existence. I mean, coming from nothing. And if you really take a look at that, you can see that it really wasn't an explosion, because you can't have oxidation in a vacuum. I mean, it's just chemistry 101. But at the same time, like, you could have the Higgs field pop into existence with just energy. And the Higgs boson is what we, for a long time, until July 4th, 2012, when I got nerd chills like crazy, we discovered that we were right about the Higgs boson, and it's what gives mass to particles. And that's very, very necessary, because mass generates gravity, and gravity pulls things together, and that's how things, come together and make things. So, if you really look at that, I mean, the physics of it, it wasn't an explosion, but, that's just splitting hairs, and I don't want to get, but it's just a kind of a terminology that we often use, even if it's not technically the most correct term. Exactly. Yeah, the one of the biggest things I've heard about the Higgs boson is they call it the God particle, and it really isn't. It's a funny story. The guy who named it, he actually, because it took 50 years and billions upon billions of dollars to find this thing in the LHC in Switzerland, he wanted to name it the God particle, but his editor would not allow him to do so. So they named it the God particle. It's kind of a funny story, but he was just wanting to call it that particle, because it was so frustrating. It took so much work to find. It was the most frustrating thing in current science, and they finally found it. I mean, this thing, literally form and decay thousands and thousands of times before you even blinked your eye once.
Right.
So, I mean, we're talking, it can barely even be said to exist because it lasts so, short of a time. But.
Well, we're coming up pretty close on 2 hours, which is longer than what I had planned on, but I don't regret a minute of the conversation.
Neither do I. This has been fun.
Yes, it definitely has, and I hate to cut it off here because I do enjoy these conversations, but I'm looking forward to the next conversation. And I'm definitely looking forward to, approaching more focused subjects and really digging deep into stuff. But I think that I do think that we've achieved our goal with this episode and really, given a good example of what to expect from these discussions and, what kind of viewpoints we're going to be approaching them from.
Of course.
Is there anything that you want to leave anybody with before we sign off?
Question everything.
Well, I would definitely agree with that.
Right.
So I guess we'll just go ahead and end it there before we stretch out any longer. If you've stayed for this whole episode, thank you so much. I definitely would love to hear your opinion on the show, of the conversation. I'll have a link to my Facebook page where you can, send me a message or whatever. If you have any questions about anything that we've talked about, we'd love to hear them. And I'm going to go ahead and say this out in front. I'm not going to disable the comments for this on YouTube, but I'm also probably not going to respond to any comments in YouTube, just because I don't want to get trapped in any kind of flame wars or anything like that, as can easily happen when it comes to topics such as these. Well, but if you do want to bring up a question that is an interesting question that we may talk about in an episode, or that you just may be interested in hearing our opinion in general, feel free to present us with these questions, and I'd love to address any of these things on the show in future episodes. So don't think that we're ignoring you if we don't directly respond in that format. So yeah, again, Travis, thank you so much for being a part of this project.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it is just as much fun and as enjoyable as I was hoping it would be. Mm-hmm. Like I've said, I love having these kind of conversations with people that don't necessarily share my viewpoint, and we can have these intelligent discussions. And I'm really looking forward to digging deeper into these issues and really picking apart where, I know in this episode we saw eye to eye on a lot of things, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but at the same time, I am looking forward to being able to debate where we do see differences because of the different perspectives.
Of course.
So again, thank you, Travis. Thank you, everybody who's listened. This has been great. Hope you'll come, check us out in our next episode. And until then, I guess just question everything.
All right.